Marcus Beaumont's fingers trembled as he stared at the email on his phone, confirming what he'd suspected all along. His airline, Celestial Airways, the very company that had humiliated him just hours ago, was now his. Blood rushed in his ears as flight attendant Karen Whitfield approached with that same condescending smile. "Sir, I'll need you to put your phone away for landing." She had no idea that the black passenger she'd denied champagne and caviar to was now her boss. Or that in minutes, every single person responsible would lose everything. Before we dive into this shocking story of discrimination and justice, let me know where you're watching from. If you believe in accountability and standing up against racism, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful true stories that expose injustice. In our society, 42-year-old Marcus Beaumont was used to being the only black face in rooms full of powerful executives. As the brilliant founder and newly appointed CEO of Horizon Technologies, he had battled prejudice throughout his meteoric rise in Silicon Valley. Today, however, was different. As he settled into his first-class seat aboard Celestial Airways Flight 223 from San Francisco to New York, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Little did the flight crew know that in his briefcase lay the final paperwork for Horizon's secret acquisition of their airline, a deal set to be completed during this very flight. Marcus adjusted his perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit and opened his laptop, reviewing the final merger documents one last time. The champagne service had begun for first-class passengers, but he noticed something odd. The flight attendants, a blonde woman and a tall man with a military haircut, seemed to be skipping over him deliberately. "Excuse me," Marcus said politely, as the blonde flight attendant named Karen Whitfield passed by again with a tray of crystal flutes. "May I have some champagne as well?" "Oh," Karen replied with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We'll get to you eventually, sir. We're serving our regular passengers first." Marcus raised an eyebrow but returned to his work. He couldn't help noticing that every white passenger in first class had already received their pre-flight beverages. The regular passenger's comment lingered in his mind, but years of similar subtle slights had taught him to choose his battles carefully. "Did you see him try to order the Dom Perignon?" Karen whispered to her colleague Bradley Thompson, loud, enough for Marcus to hear. "As if he knows what real champagne tastes like." Bradley snickered. "Probably used all his points for this one trip. They always do." Marcus kept his eyes on his screen, his jaw tightening. The meaning behind "they" was crystal clear. But he had an airline to acquire. The discrimination was nothing new, just particularly disappointing in 2025. Flight supervisor Richard Palmer, a man with salt and pepper hair and an air of unearned authority, joined the whispering session. His gaze raked over Marcus with obvious disapproval. "Is there a problem with seat 2A?" Richard asked Karen, not bothering to lower his voice. "Just managing expectations," Karen replied. "You know how they get when they find themselves in first class." Marcus closed his laptop and took a deep breath. The merger documents would wait. Some things couldn't go unchallenged. "Excuse me," he called out firmly. "I'd like to see the first-class menu, please." Bradley approached with obvious reluctance, handing over the leather-bound menu with barely concealed disdain. "Anything specific you're looking for, sir?" The pause before "sir" was deliberate. Marcus scanned the menu, noting the list of luxury food items including beluga caviar, wagyu beef, and vintage champagne. "I'll have the caviar service with the Dom Perignon 2010, please." The silence that followed was pointed. Karen and Bradley exchanged glances. "I'm sorry, sir," Karen said with false sweetness. "Those premium items are reserved for our special passengers." "Special passengers?" Marcus repeated, glancing pointedly at the white businessman across the aisle who was already enjoying precisely what Marcus had requested. "And what qualifies someone as special? Frequent flyers, airline partners, passengers who belong in first class," Bradley interjected, emphasizing the last words with unmistakable meaning. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable with our standard offerings." "I see," Marcus said quietly. "And exactly where in your service policy does it state that certain menu items are restricted based on these qualifications?" "Sir, If you're going to be difficult, I can have the flight supervisor speak with you, Bradley threatened, his professional veneer cracking. That won't be necessary, Marcus replied. I simply want to be served the same items other first-class passengers are receiving. Is there a problem here? Richard Palmer had appeared beside them, his presence looming over Marcus's seat. This passenger is demanding special treatment, Karen explained, her voice carrying to nearby seats. He's insisting on our reserve items. Richard scrutinized Marcus with unconcealed suspicion. Sir, if you continue to harass my flight crew, I'll have no choice but to have you removed from this flight for causing a disturbance. Around them, other first-class passengers watched the scene unfold. Most averted their eyes, unwilling to get involved. A few nodded in agreement with the crew, their expressions suggesting they too questioned Marcus's presence in first class. Only one passenger, an Asian American woman seated diagonally across from Marcus, observed with narrowed eyes and a frown. She caught Marcus's glance briefly, her expression conveying that she recognized exactly what was happening. I'm not causing any disturbance, Marcus stated calmly. I'm simply requesting the same service that other passengers in this cabin are receiving. Sir, this is your final warning, Richard said, his hand moving to his communication device. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable flying with another airline that better suits your expectations. Marcus looked around at the faces in first class. The casual cruelty, the blind acceptance, the silent complicity. And in that moment, he made a decision. This wasn't just about champagne or caviar. It was about a system that needed changing from the inside out. A system he was about to own. I'd like your employee identification numbers, Marcus stated firmly, maintaining perfect composure despite the blood pounding in his ears. And I'd like to speak with someone from corporate headquarters immediately. The request visibly startled the trio of crew members, but Richard quickly recovered, leaning down to whisper menacingly, Let me explain something to you. I've been flying these skies for 27 years, and I decide who stays on my plane. Push this any further, and I'll radio ahead to have this aircraft diverted. How would you like to explain to all these fine people why their day was ruined because you couldn't accept your place? Have you ever faced discrimination where others pretended not to notice? Comment 1 if you've experienced or witnessed racism that others ignored. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves equal treatment regardless of their skin, color, and subscribe to see powerful stories of justice being served. Marcus remained silent, calculating his options. As he reached for his water glass, Karen suddenly moved, accidentally knocking the glass over. Cold water cascaded across Marcus's lap, soaking his suit and splashing onto his briefcase. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, Karen exclaimed with theatrical concern that didn't match the smirk tugging at her lips. Let me get you some napkins. She returned with a handful of thin cocktail napkins, wholly inadequate for the spill. As Marcus dabbed at his soaking clothes, he discreetly activated the recording function on his smartphone, placing it in his breast pocket with the camera, peeking out. Excuse me? A voice called out. The Asian American woman Marcus had noticed earlier had risen from her seat. I saw what you did. That was clearly deliberate. Ma'am, please return to your seat, Bradley commanded sharply. This doesn't concern you. My name is Emily Chen, Executive Vice President at Pacific Investment Group, she replied, standing her ground. And I've been watching this disgraceful display since boarding. Karen's smile became brittle. Ms. Chen, we appreciate your concern, but we have a disruptive passenger situation that we're handling according to protocol. Disruptive? Emily challenged. The only disruption I've seen is your blatant discrimination against this gentleman. Richard stepped between them. Ms. Chen, as a valued elite passenger, we'd hate to see your status affected by involving yourself in a security matter. Please return to your seat, now. The veiled threat hung in the air. Emily hesitated, then handed Marcus her business card. Before returning to her seat, her expression conveying both apology and solidarity. Throughout the first-class cabin, Richard began speaking quietly to other passengers, occasionally gesturing toward Marcus. Marcus could catch snippets, becoming agitated, concerns about behavior, security protocols. The systematic isolation was familiar to Marcus. He'd experienced it in boardrooms, at executive retreats, in country clubs. The majority's silent, agreement that he didn't belong, that his presence was a disruption to the natural order. Marcus checked his briefcase and found what he feared. The water had seeped through, dampening the corner of the merger documents. The damage wasn't catastrophic, but it was another calculated move in this escalating game. "Attention passengers, the seatbelt sign has been illuminated for your safety," announced the captain. "Please remain seated." Marcus noticed that despite this announcement, other first-class passengers continued to move freely about the cabin, using the restroom and accessing the overhead bins without comment from the crew. When he attempted to stand, Bradley immediately appeared. "Sir, the seatbelt sign is on. You need to remain seated." "But other passengers are—" "Sir, this is your final warning before I call security," Bradley interrupted. Suddenly, a stern-faced man in plain clothes approached Marcus's seat. "Sir, I'm the air marshal on this flight. I've received reports that you've been threatening the crew. I need you to remain in your seat for the duration of the flight." Marcus felt a cold wave of anger wash over him. "I've made no threats. I've simply asked to be treated like every other passenger in this cabin." "That's not what the crew has reported," the marshal replied flatly. "Consider this a formal warning." As the marshal moved away, Marcus used the opportunity to make a discreet call to his VP, Zoe Washington. "Zoe, it's me," he whispered. "The documents got damaged and I'm facing a situation here." "Water damage? We can work with that," Zoe replied efficiently. "The acquisition is still proceeding electronically. In fact, it's nearly complete." "What about Whitehall? Is he still meeting the flight?" Marcus asked, referring to James Whitehall, Celestial Airways' current CEO, who had no idea who the mysterious buyer was. "Confirmed. He'll be at the gate to greet the anonymous investor personally. But Marcus, are you okay? You sound tense." "I'll tell you everything later," Marcus said before ending the call. The irony wasn't lost on him. In minutes, he would own this entire airline, including the careers of everyone who was currently treating him like an unwelcome intruder. Do you think Marcus should reveal his identity immediately or wait for the perfect moment? Comment 2 if you'd keep your cool like Marcus, or 3 if you'd expose them immediately. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about justice being served in unexpected ways. What would happen when the crew discovered the man they'd been humiliating was about to become their ultimate boss? And would Marcus's journey for justice stop there? Or was this just the beginning? As the flight continued eastward, Marcus worked quietly on his tablet, appearing subdued but internally mapping out exactly how this would unfold. To the crew, he seemed defeated, exactly what they wanted to see. In reality, he was orchestrating the most important corporate takeover of his career. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. This wasn't the first time Marcus had been underestimated because of his skin color. Growing up in Oakland to working-class parents, he'd fought for every opportunity. At Stanford, professors had questioned whether his admission was merit-based. In his first tech startup, investors had repeatedly asked to speak with the actual founder when he walked into pitch meetings. Even after building Horizon Technologies into a billion-dollar enterprise, he still faced board members who attributed his success to diversity initiatives rather than his brilliant strategic mind. Marcus glanced up to see the air marshal watching, him intently from several rows away. The man's hand rested near his hip, a subtle reminder of the threat they'd manufactured. For a black man in America, being labeled a threat carried potentially deadly consequences, a fact the crew had weaponized without hesitation. "I bet he used all his welfare money for that ticket," Karen's voice carried from the galley where she whispered to Bradley. Their laughter felt like sandpaper on Marcus's skin. "Probably the first time he's seen real silverware," Bradley replied, not bothering to lower his voice. "Did you see how confused he looked about which fork to use?" Marcus hadn't actually touched his silverware, as they'd refused to serve him food, but reality seemed irrelevant to their narrative. His phone vibrated with a text from Emily Chen. "I recorded everything. Sending you the video now. This is disgraceful." A file transfer notification appeared on his screen. Marcus nodded slightly in Emily's direction. grateful for the additional documentation. Her video captured exchanges he'd missed while on the phone with Zoe. Karen and Bradley openly mocking him to other passengers, Richard instructing the air marshal to watch for any sudden movements. As Marcus reviewed the footage, Richard approached his seat again. "We'll be landing in approximately 1 hour. For security reasons, you'll need to remain seated until all other passengers have deplaned. Security personnel will escort you from the aircraft." "On what grounds?" Marcus asked calmly. "Threatening behavior, disruption of a commercial flight, intimidation of crew members," Richard listed smugly. "The authorities will sort it out." "I see," Marcus replied, his voice betraying nothing of the storm brewing within. As Richard walked away, Marcus's phone lit up with the email he'd been waiting for. The acquisition of Celestial Airways was complete. Horizon Technologies now owned the airline, with Marcus as majority shareholder and executive authority. He was now effectively Richard, Karen, and Bradley's employer. The timing was perfect. According to Zoe's update, his legal team was already at JFK, along with select media contacts who'd been told only that a major story was breaking. James Whitehall, still unaware of the buyer's identity, would be greeting his new boss while his employees were attempting to have that same person detained. While reviewing the company data that came with the acquisition, Marcus discovered something interesting. Richard Palmer wasn't just Karen's supervisor, he was her uncle. He had fast-tracked her career, promoting her over more qualified candidates. Bradley Thompson was a family friend who'd failed the flight attendant exam twice before Richard intervened. Even more damning was the history of buried complaints. Marcus found dozens of discrimination incidents involving the trio, all mysteriously resolved with no disciplinary action. James Whitehall had personally intervened in several cases, citing Richard's invaluable contribution to the company culture. That culture was about to change dramatically. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, centering himself for what was to come. In his 20-year career, he'd faced countless boardroom battles and corporate maneuvers, but nothing quite like this. Today, he would turn discrimination into justice, not just for himself, but for everyone who'd been silenced by Richard Palmer and his enablers. The plane began its initial descent into New York. The real journey was about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final approach into John F. Kennedy International Airport. The local time is 4:37 p.m., and the temperature is 62 degrees. On behalf of Celestial Airways, we thank you for flying with us today. The captain's announcement signaled the beginning of the endgame. Marcus watched as Karen and Bradley moved through the cabin, providing attentive service to every passenger except him. Their confidence had grown throughout the flight, each small act of discrimination emboldening the next. "Would you like a hot towel, sir?" Karen asked the white passenger beside Marcus with a warm smile, deliberately turning her back to Marcus. After serving him, Bradley appeared at the galley entrance, giving Karen a thumbs up and mouthing something about security ready. The crew's body language had shifted from defensive to triumphant. They believed they'd successfully put the troublesome black passenger in his place and would soon be rid of him. Another successful flight dealing with difficult people, Bradley announced loudly enough for the first-class cabin to hear. "This is why we have protocols in place, folks. Safety and comfort for all our valued guests." Several passengers nodded approvingly, casting suspicious glances toward Marcus. The narrative had been successfully established. He was the problem, the outsider, the threat to their collective comfort. Emily Chen attempted to share her recording with a couple seated near her. "You should see what really happened," she insisted, holding out her phone. "Miss, I'll need you to put that device away for landing," Richard interrupted, suddenly materializing beside her. "And I'll remind you that recording on board this aircraft without permission from all parties is against company policy." Emily reluctantly stowed her phone, shooting an apologetic look toward Marcus. The crew's control of the situation seemed absolute. As the aircraft descended through clouds, Marcus received another text from Zoe. "Everything in place. Security. Team standing by. Whitehall looking nervous at gate. Media positioned discreetly." Through the window, the vast sprawl of New York came into view. Marcus had always loved this city for its diversity, its energy, its possibilities. Today, it would become the stage for a long overdue reckoning. The aircraft touched down with a gentle thud, taxiing toward the terminal. While other passengers prepared to disembark, gathering belongings and powering up phones, Marcus remained perfectly still, watching the crew's celebratory glances. "Thank you for flying Celestial Airways," Karen announced over the intercom. "Local ground transportation information is available in the terminal. Premium passengers may proceed to our executive lounge for complimentary refreshments." The emphasis on premium was accompanied by a pointed look at Marcus. The message was clear. Spaces of luxury and privilege weren't meant for people like him, regardless of the ticket he'd purchased. As the aircraft reached the gate, Richard made one final approach to Marcus's seat. "When security escorts you off, try not to make another scene," he advised in a low voice. "We've already contacted our corporate office about adding you to our no-fly list." Marcus merely nodded, which Richard interpreted as submission. The flight supervisor turned away with a satisfied smile, unaware that he'd just threatened the new owner of the entire airline with a no-fly list. The cabin door opened, and the deplaning process began. First-class passengers stood, retrieving their items from overhead bins. Many gave Marcus a wide berth as they passed, having absorbed the crew's manufactured narrative about his threatening behavior. Marcus observed everything with the calm of a chess master, watching an opponent move exactly as anticipated. Karen and Bradley stood at the exit, warmly thanking each passenger except him. Richard positioned himself strategically near the cockpit, occasionally speaking into his radio, no doubt coordinating with the security team waiting in the jetway. "Great job today," Richard told his crew as the cabin emptied. "We'll celebrate properly once this situation is handled." "I could use a drink after dealing with him," Karen replied, not bothering to lower her voice. "Did you see how entitled he was? Demanding caviar like he even knows what it is." "People need to understand their place," Bradley agreed. "First class has standards." As the last regular passenger exited, Marcus remained seated as instructed. The cabin felt suddenly larger, emptier, with only him and the crew remaining. The false smiles disappeared from their faces as they approached his seat. "Security is ready for you, sir," Richard announced with thinly veiled satisfaction. "You may gather your belongings and exit the aircraft now." Marcus stood smoothly, retrieving his briefcase and straightening his still damp suit. "Thank you for the memorable experience," he said quietly, moving toward the exit. The crew exchanged victorious glances, believing they'd successfully defended their territory against an unwelcome intruder. They had no idea that in moments, their entire world would be upended by the very man they'd spent the past 5 hours humiliating. As Marcus stepped into the jetway, he saw exactly what he expected. 2 burly security officers waiting with stern expressions. James Whitehall standing nearby looking confused, and just beyond them, Zoe Washington with his legal team. The stage was set. The real show was about to begin. "Mr. Beaumont." One of the security officers stepped forward, his expression stern. "We need you to come with us. There's been a complaint about your behavior on the flight." Marcus nodded calmly, noticing how Richard Palmer emerged from the EO jetway behind him, a smug smile playing on his lips. Karen and Bradley flanked their supervisor, watching with barely concealed satisfaction as security prepared to escort Marcus away. "This passenger threatened my crew and disrupted our flight," Richard explained officially to the security personnel. "We've documented multiple instances of aggressive behavior and wish to press charges for interfering with a flight crew's duties." Have you ever witnessed someone being falsely accused because of their race? Comment 1 if you've seen racial profiling in action. 2 if you believe racial profiling is still a major problem in our society today. Or 3 if you've personally experienced discrimination like Marcus. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you believe in standing up against injustice. James Whitehall, the soon-to-be former CEO of Celestial Airways, looked perplexed. The middle-aged executive with silver temples and an expensive suit glanced between Marcus and the security team. "Excuse me, but what's happening here? I was told to greet an important investor at this gate." Whitehall checked his watch impatiently. Before security could respond, a commanding female voice cut through the tension. That would be us, Mr. Whitehall. Zoe Washington strode forward with the confidence of someone used to navigating corporate battlefields. Behind her, a team of professionals in impeccable suits formed a formidable phalanx. "I'm Zoe Washington, Executive Vice President of Horizon Technologies," she announced, extending her hand toward Whitehall while deliberately positioning herself between Marcus and the security officers. "And this is Marcus Beaumont, our Chief Executive Officer." The shift in the atmosphere was immediate and palpable. The security officers exchanged uncertain glances, their hands dropping from Marcus's arms. "Marcus Beaumont?" Whitehall's complexion paled visibly. "The Marcus Beaumont from Horizon Technologies." "The very same," Marcus confirmed, straightening his suit jacket. "Though according to your flight crew, I'm just a troublemaker who doesn't belong in first class." Richard's smug expression faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "CEO or not, sir. Your behavior was unacceptable. We have protocols that apply to everyone." "Interesting," Marcus replied. "Do those protocols include denying service based on skin color? Or spilling water accidentally on passengers who request the same menu items as white travelers?" Karen stepped forward, her customer service smile firmly back in place. "There's been a misunderstanding, sir. As I tried to explain on the flight, certain premium items are reserved for our most valued customers. I was unaware we had such a policy," Whitehall interjected, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "We don't," Marcus stated flatly. "Your crew invented it on the spot." Bradley laughed nervously. "Sir, with all due respect, you're playing the race card. This had nothing to do with your skin color." Emily Chen emerged from the jetway, moving quickly to join the growing confrontation. "I recorded everything," she announced, holding up her phone. "Every discriminatory comment, every time they treated Mr. Beaumont differently from other first-class passengers." Richard's face darkened. "Recording on our aircraft is against company policy. That footage is inadmissible and illegal." "Actually," one of Marcus's lawyers stepped forward, "in the state of New York, one-party consent is all that's required for recording conversations. And as Ms. Chen was a party to these interactions, her recordings are perfectly legal." Whitehall looked like he might be ill. "Mr. Beaumont, I want to personally apologize for any misunderstanding. Perhaps we could discuss this privately in our executive lounge. I'm sure we can offer you compensatory miles or an upgrade on your next flight with us." The irony of being offered an upgrade when he was already in first class wasn't lost on Marcus. More importantly, Whitehall still didn't understand the full situation. "Mr. Whitehall, I'm not interested in miles or upgrades," Marcus replied evenly. "What I'm interested in is accountability." Richard stepped closer to Whitehall, lowering his voice but still audible. "James, don't worry. I have contacts on the board who can make this go away. He's bluffing about having evidence." "I assure you I'm not bluffing," Marcus countered. "And as for those board contacts, Mr. Palmer, they might be less helpful than you imagine." "Is that a threat?" Richard bristled, his facade of professionalism crumbling. "Listen, I don't care who you are. You don't get to come on my aircraft and make demands." "Your aircraft?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That's an interesting choice of words." Karen laughed, the sound brittle with nervousness. "Mr. Beaumont is obviously making this into something it's not. If he'd just been patient like other passengers instead of demanding special treatment." "Special treatment?" Emily interrupted, incredulously. "He asked for the same champagne and caviar that the white passenger in 2C received without question." The gathering crowd of onlookers had grown, including other passengers from the flight and curious airport staff. The security officers, sensing the shift in power dynamics, had backed away slightly, uncertain whose authority to respect. "Mr. Beaumont," Whitehall attempted again, desperation creeping into his voice. "I'm sure we can resolve this amicably without further escalation." Marcus observed the scene calmly. Richard's aggression, Karen's denial, Bradley's mounting panic, Whitehall's desperate damage control. The truth was, they still had no idea what was coming. What would happen when they discovered that the passenger they discriminated against now controlled their entire company? Would justice finally be served, or would powerful forces once again protect those who abused their authority? "I think you should see this," Emily said, stepping forward and offering her phone to Whitehall. "The evidence speaks for itself." The CEO reluctantly took the device and pressed play. The video showed clear footage of Karen deliberately skipping, Marcus during service, Bradley making racially charged comments within earshot, and Richard threatening to have Marcus removed when he simply requested equal treatment. "The most expensive menu items are for real first-class passengers," Karen's voice came clearly through the speaker, followed by a whispered, "Not people who got lucky with an upgrade." "I purchased my ticket directly," Marcus's calm voice responded. On the recording, "I wasn't upgraded." "Sure you weren't," Bradley's sarcastic reply rang out, followed by snickering. Whitehall's face grew increasingly ashen as the video continued. Other passengers who had witnessed the discrimination but remained silent now shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with Marcus. "That recording was obtained illegally," Richard insisted, attempting to grab the phone from Whitehall's hands. "It's inadmissible and against company policy to record crew members without consent." "That's not your decision to make," one of Marcus's lawyers interjected smoothly. "And trying to destroy evidence is a serious offense, Mr. Palmer." Another member of Marcus's legal team stepped forward, opening a folder. "We've taken the liberty of researching Celestial Airways' history of discrimination complaints. Interestingly, there have been 27 formal complaints against Mr. Palmer and his crew in the past 3 years alone, all mysteriously resolved without disciplinary action." Richard's complexion turned from red to white. "Those complaints were investigated according to company protocol and found to be without merit." "By whom?" Marcus asked pointedly. "By the appropriate departments," Richard replied evasively. Zoe produced another document from her briefcase. "According to Celestial's records, the final review of crew discrimination complaints falls to the Director of Employee Relations, one Victor Palmer, your brother. Quite the convenient arrangement." The revelation rippled through the growing crowd. Karen stepped closer to Richard, her previously confident demeanor crumbling. Bradley began edging away slightly, creating physical distance between himself and his superiors. "The damage to my merger documents was also not accidental," Marcus added, removing the water-stained papers from his briefcase. "Ms. Whitfield deliberately spilled water on my belongings after I requested to see a supervisor." "That's ridiculous," Karen protested, though her voice lacked conviction. "It was turbulence, an accident." "Interesting that turbulence only affected my seat and no one else's," Marcus observed. "And that it occurred precisely after I asked for employee identification numbers." Richard's strategy shifted abruptly. "Mr. Whitehall, we've served Celestial Airways loyally for decades. Are you really going to take the word of this person over your trusted employees? We know how these complaints work. They're leveraged for free upgrades, compensation, special treatment." The thinly veiled racism in Richard's dismissal hung in the air. Whitehall looked trapped between his loyalty to long-term employees and the undeniable evidence before him. "James," Richard continued, using the CEO's first name deliberately, "remember when the board was considering staff cuts last year? Who advocated for your retention package? My connections have protected this company's leadership through multiple challenges." The implied threat wasn't subtle. Whitehall hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Marcus watched the calculation happening behind Whitehall's eyes. The CEO was trying to determine which choice would best protect his position and interests. Principles and justice were clearly secondary considerations. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," Whitehall finally suggested. "Mr. Beaumont, I assure you that Celestial Airways takes these allegations very seriously. We'll conduct a thorough internal investigation and—" "Internal investigation?" Marcus interrupted. "By whom? Mr. Palmer's brother? Or perhaps the board members he just referenced as his personal connections?" Karen sensed the tide turning and attempted a new approach. "Mr. Beaumont, if there was a misunderstanding, I sincerely apologize. We serve hundreds of passengers daily, and sometimes in our effort to maintain efficiency, interactions can seem impersonal." "Impersonal?" Emily challenged. You literally said, and I quote, "People like him don't appreciate fine dining anyway." That's not impersonal. That's prejudiced. Bradley, seeing Karen's strategy failing, decided to blame his superior. "I was just following Mr. Palmer's instructions. He specifically told us to make Mr. Beaumont feel unwelcome. I have text messages proving it." The betrayal stunned Richard. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed. "Saving my job," Bradley muttered. "They have evidence, Richard." As the crew began to fracture, Zoe leaned toward Marcus. "Everything's ready whenever you are. The documents are all filed and confirmed." Marcus nodded slightly. He could end this charade now, but there was a cold satisfaction in watching the trio implicate themselves further as their solidarity crumbled. Richard, sensing he was losing control, made one final desperate play. "Security. This man is harassing my crew and disrupting airport operations. I want him removed from this terminal immediately." He pointed aggressively at Marcus. The security officers hesitated, looking uncertainly between Richard and the imposing legal team surrounding Marcus. One of them touched his radio, requesting guidance from a supervisor. Richard, interpreting this as support, grew bolder. "This is precisely the kind of entitled behavior he exhibited on our flight, disrupting operations, making unfounded accusations, playing the victim." "That's enough, Mr. Palmer," Whitehall finally interrupted, finding his spine at last. "These accusations are clearly not unfounded." "You're taking his side?" Richard was incredulous. "After everything we've done for you? One phone call to Chairman Reynolds, and your career is finished, James. Don't forget who your real allies are." The naked threat silenced the gathered crowd. Even Karen and Bradley seemed shocked by Richard's overplay. "Are you threatening the CEO of Celestial Airways?" Marcus asked quietly. "I'm reminding him of political realities," Richard snapped. "This company has a certain culture, certain expectations. People who don't understand that don't last long, regardless of their title." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "A culture of discrimination, retaliation, and cronyism. Thank you for making that so clear, Mr. Palmer." "You have no idea how things work in this industry," Richard snarled. "You think your money makes you untouchable? There are powers beyond your comprehension at play here." "Is that so?" Marcus replied calmly. "Tell me more about these powers." Richard seemed to realize he'd said too much. He turned to Whitehall. Instead, "James, we need to end this circus now. Call your security team and have them escort Mr. Beaumont to his connecting flight. We can discuss appropriate compensation later, after he's cooled down." Whitehall still seemed torn, but his business instincts were finally asserting themselves. "Actually, Richard, I think it's time I explained something to you." The CEO straightened his tie nervously. "Mr. Beaumont isn't just any passenger, he's—" Marcus raised a hand, interrupting Whitehall mid-sentence. "I think it's time I introduced myself properly." The moment of truth had arrived. "My name is Marcus Beaumont, founder and CEO of Horizon Technologies," Marcus began, his voice carrying through the now silent jetway. "And as of approximately 47 minutes ago, the majority owner of Celestial Airways." The statement landed like a thunderclap. Richard's face went slack with shock. Karen's hand flew to her mouth. Bradley stumbled backward as if physically struck. Even Whitehall, who had suspected something similar, looked stunned by the finality of the announcement. "That's impossible," Richard finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is it?" Marcus removed his phone from his pocket and displayed the email confirmation that had arrived during the flight. "The acquisition was finalized while we were over Pennsylvania. The airline you've been claiming as yours hasn't belonged to you for nearly an hour." "You can't just buy an airline without board approval," Richard protested, though his voice lacked conviction. "The board voted unanimously in favor of the acquisition last week," Whitehall confirmed, finding his voice at last. "The buyer's identity was kept confidential at Mr. Beaumont's request, but the deal was completely legitimate." Zoe stepped forward, handing Marcus a leather portfolio. "All the necessary documentation, finalized and certified. Horizon Technologies now owns 74% of Celestial Airways stock, with Marcus personally controlling 51% of voting shares." The color drained from Richard's face as the full implication set in. "You set me up," he accused, pointing a trembling finger at Marcus. "You deliberately provoked my crew to create this situation." "I boarded a plane," Marcus replied evenly. "I requested the same service other passengers received. The discrimination was entirely your choice, Mr. Palmer. You weren't set up. You were simply exposed." Karen began to cry, theatrical sobs that carried through the terminal. "Mr. Beaumont, please. I had no idea who you were. If I'd known you were the owner—" "That's precisely the problem, Ms. Whitfield," Marcus interrupted. "You believed it was acceptable to discriminate against someone you perceived as powerless. The fact that you would have treated me differently if you'd known my position only confirms your prejudice." Bradley had begun edging toward the exit, attempting to quietly distance himself from the unfolding catastrophe. "Mr. Thompson," Marcus called out, "I suggest you remain present. This concerns you directly." Bradley froze, then slowly turned back, his expression a mixture of fear and resignation. Richard, recovering slightly from the initial shock, attempted to regain control. "This changes nothing. I have connections that go beyond this company, friends on every major airline board, contacts in the aviation authority. One phone call, and your precious acquisition will face regulatory nightmares you can't imagine." The threat hung in the air for a moment before Whitehall cleared his throat. "Richard, I wouldn't—" "Shut up, James," Richard snapped. "You've proven where your loyalties lie. When I'm finished, you'll be lucky to get a job managing the snack bar at a regional airport." Marcus observed the meltdown with clinical detachment. "Mr. Palmer, are you threatening to use industry connections to sabotage Celestial Airways because of personal grievance?" "I'm promising you consequences," Richard replied, his voice shaking with rage. "This isn't over. One call to Senator Williams, and your little power play falls apart." "Interesting." Marcus nodded to one of his lawyers, who made a note. "Please continue elaborating on how you plan to abuse industry relationships for retaliatory purposes. It's all extremely helpful." Something in Marcus's calm response finally penetrated Richard's anger. The flight supervisor fell silent, belatedly realizing he was digging his grave deeper with every word. "I want to be absolutely clear," Marcus addressed the entire gathering. "This acquisition was planned months ago, based on Celestial's market, position and fleet. What happened on that flight was not part of any plan. It was simply an ugly reminder of why corporate culture starts from the top." He turned to face the three crew members directly. "Richard Palmer, Karen Whitfield, and Bradley Thompson, as majority owner and acting executive authority of Celestial Airways, I am terminating your employment, effective immediately." The formal declaration echoed through the jetway. Karen's theatrical sobs became genuine wails of distress. Bradley looked as though he might vomit. Richard's face contorted with a rage beyond words. "You can't do this," he finally sputtered. "Union rules, employment contracts. Both allow for immediate termination in cases of gross misconduct," Marcus's head counsel interjected smoothly. "Racial discrimination, creation of a hostile environment, falsifying security threats, and threatening company executives all qualify. You'll be receiving formal documentation shortly." Richard's rage finally boiled over. He pulled out his phone, fingers jabbing at the screen. "One call, Beaumont. One call to Howard Williams at the FAA and your new acquisition will be grounded for safety violations I personally know about." The admission silenced the crowd again. Whitehall looked particularly alarmed. "What safety violations, Richard?" he asked quietly. "The ones I've been handling discreetly for years," Richard snapped without thinking. "The maintenance issues your cost-cutting created that I've been keeping off the official reports." The horrified expression on Whitehall's face confirmed that Richard wasn't bluffing. Marcus signaled subtly to Zoe, who stepped away to make a call. "Mr. Palmer," Marcus said carefully, "are you admitting to concealing safety violations from federal regulators?" The question seemed to penetrate Richard's rage. He looked around, suddenly aware of the many witnesses to his confession. "That's not what I meant," he backpedaled hastily. "I was speaking hypothetically." "It didn't sound hypothetical to me," said a new voice from the back of the crowd. A man in a dark suit stepped forward, showing federal identification. Roger. Daniels, Federal Aviation Administration. We've actually been investigating reports of falsified safety records at Celestial for months. Thank you for the confirmation, Mr. Palmer. Richard's face went from red to ashen in seconds. I want my union representative and a lawyer present before any further questions. Karen, sensing the ship sinking, made a desperate play. It was all Richard's idea. He forced me to sign off on maintenance reports I knew weren't complete. I have proof on my personal laptop. Karen, Richard looked betrayed. You're my niece. And you made me falsify federal documents, she countered, tears streaming down her face. I could go to prison because of you. Bradley stepped forward next. I want immunity. I can provide emails, text messages, recordings, proving Richard coordinated a systematic pattern of discrimination against minority passengers, especially in first class. He called it maintaining standards. The crew's unity had completely collapsed, each now scrambling to save themselves at the other's expense. Zoe returned to Marcus's side. Our legal team has already contacted the Department of Transportation's Civil Rights Division. They're very interested in the evidence we've gathered. Richard, seeming to finally grasp the magnitude of his situation, made a last, desperate move. He lunged toward Marcus, his face contorted with hatred. You ruined everything, you entitled. He never finished the sentence. Security personnel intercepted him before he could reach Marcus, restraining him as he shouted racial slurs that echoed through the terminal. Get this on video, someone in the crowd called out, and dozens of phones rose to capture Richard Palmer's spectacular implosion. As Richard was escorted away, still shouting obscenities, Marcus turned to Whitehall. Mr. Whitehall, I think we need to have a serious conversation about the company's operational standards, shall we? The former CEO nodded numbly, looking like a man watching his career dissolve before his eyes. Marcus had owned the airline for less than an hour, and already, the reckoning had begun. I hereby terminate your employment with Celestial Airways, effective immediately. Marcus's words hung in the air as Richard, Karen, and Bradley were officially informed of their dismissal. Security personnel stood nearby, ready to escort them from the premises. A small crowd of onlookers had gathered, many recording the scene on their phones. You can't do this, Richard protested, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. I've given 27 years to this company. I have rights. Have you ever witnessed someone face consequences for their discrimination? Comment 4. If you believe accountability is necessary for change. 5. If you think more companies should take racism seriously. Or 6. If you've seen someone try to deny their racist actions when confronted. Don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe if you want to see more stories of justice being served to those who abuse their power. Your employee handbook is quite clear, Marcus's legal counsel replied, handing each former employee a document. Section 8.3 specifically allows for immediate termination in cases of discriminatory behavior, creating a hostile work environment, or actions that damage the company's reputation. Karen dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. This is so unfair. One bad day, one misunderstanding, and my entire career is over? This wasn't one bad day, Emily Chen interjected. Based on your comfortable pattern of behavior, this was your standard operating procedure. The only difference is that today, you chose the wrong passenger to discriminate against. Bradley, more pragmatic than his colleagues, had already begun removing his company identification and wingpins. Is there any possibility of a settlement? Some arrangement that doesn't end with my name in headlines? Before Marcus could respond, a commotion at the terminal entrance drew everyone's attention. Richard, who had been momentarily silent, suddenly brightened. Davis, over here, he called out. A distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit approached, flanked by 2 assistants. Richard, I came as soon as I got your message. What's this emergency? Wallace Davis, chairman of the Aviation Authority Regional Board, Richard announced, proudly. And my brother-in-law. Wallace, this man has orchestrated a hostile takeover and is conducting an illegal purge of senior staff. Davis surveyed the scene with a frown. What exactly is happening here? Justice, Marcus replied simply. Mr. Palmer and his crew discriminated against me during my flight. When I requested the same service other first-class passengers received, they threatened me, attempted to have me removed from the flight, and arranged for security to detain me upon landing. Davis looked skeptical. Richard Palmer is one of our most respected aviation professionals. I find these allegations difficult to believe. Fortunately, belief isn't required, Zoe interjected, gesturing to the phones and cameras recording the scene. We have extensive documentation, including multiple passenger recordings and the crew's own admissions. Davis wavered slightly, but rallied. Even so, termination seems excessive for what amounts to a customer service dispute. As chairman of the regional board, I strongly recommend reinstating these employees pending a proper investigation. Marcus studied Davis carefully. Mr. Davis, are you using your official position to intervene in a private company's personnel matters because the terminated employee is your relative? Davis bristled. I'm simply ensuring proper procedures are followed. Interesting, Marcus nodded to his legal team, who made notes. And in your official capacity, were you aware that Mr. Palmer has been concealing safety violations from federal inspectors? The color drained from Davis's face. That's a serious accusation. It is, agreed the FAA representative who had stepped forward earlier. One that Mr. Palmer himself confirmed minutes ago, witnessed by dozens of people. Richard shot a panicked look at his brother-in-law. Wallace, you know about those maintenance issues. We discussed them at Thanksgiving last year. Davis took a physical step back, distancing himself from Richard. I have no idea what you're talking about. The hell? You don't, Richard shouted, his composure finally shattering completely. Who do you think helped bury those reports when the whistleblower came forward last summer? The FAA representative raised his eyebrows. Whistleblower? What whistleblower? Richard realized too late what he'd revealed. He fell silent, looking trapped. Marcus turned to Whitehall. Mr. Whitehall, were you aware of these suppressed safety concerns? The CEO looked physically ill. I was informed of minor discrepancies that Richard assured me were being addressed according to protocols. And did those protocols include informing federal regulators? Whitehall's silence was answer enough. Karen, seeing the growing legal jeopardy, made her move. I have copies of all the falsified maintenance logs, she announced desperately. Richard made me sign off on them. I saved everything as insurance. You treacherous little... Richard lunged toward his niece but was restrained by security. Personnel. Take him into custody, the FAA representative instructed. Threatening a potential federal witness is a serious offense. As Richard was led away, still hurling threats and accusations, Marcus addressed Karen and Bradley. Your terminations stand, but your future legal situations may depend on your cooperation with federal investigators. Karen nodded tearfully, while Bradley quietly requested contact information for the investigation team. Davis, realizing his own exposure, attempted to slip away unnoticed. Marcus's voice stopped him. Mr. Davis, I believe federal authorities will have questions for you as well. The aviation board chairman froze, then turned back with forced dignity. I've done nothing wrong. That remains to be determined, Marcus replied evenly. But attempting to use official influence to protect family members from consequences for discrimination and safety violations certainly merits investigation. As Davis was escorted to a private room for questioning, Zoe approached Marcus with her tablet. It's starting already, she reported, showing him a social media feed. Richard's meltdown has gone viral. Celestial racism is trending. Marcus scanned the notifications pouring in. The stock price for Celestial was already beginning to fluctuate as the story spread. We need to get ahead of this, Marcus decided. Prepare a press statement outlining the discrimination incident, the immediate terminations, and our zero-tolerance policy moving forward. Emphasize that we're cooperating fully with federal authorities regarding the safety concerns that have come to light. As his team mobilized, Marcus became aware of Emily Chen still standing nearby. Ms. Chen, I can't thank you enough for your courage today. Too often witnesses to discrimination remain silent. Emily smiled sadly. I've been that silent witness before, and I've regretted it ever since. Not today. Horizon Technologies could use people with your integrity, Marcus offered. If you're ever looking for a change, please call me directly. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the terminal entrance. A camera crew from a local news station had arrived, along with reporters from several major outlets. Mr. Beaumont, called out a reporter. Is it true you just fired the entire crew that discriminated against you? Before Marcus could respond, a breaking news alert appeared on Zoe's tablet. She showed it to him with concern. Right-wing pundit calling it reverse discrimination, she murmured. Claims you orchestrated the whole thing to take over the airline. Marcus wasn't surprised. They're going to paint me as an angry black man abusing his power for revenge. It's already happening, Zoe confirmed, scrolling through more alerts. Conservative outlets are rallying around Palmer, calling him a victim of cancel culture. As if on cue, Marcus's phone rang with a notification from Celestial's board members. Several were expressing concerns about the hasty terminations and potential public relations damage. The counterattack had begun faster than even Marcus had anticipated. Richard Palmer might be facing legal troubles, but he clearly had powerful allies willing to spin the narrative in his favor. This wasn't just about 3 discriminatory employees anymore. It was about to become a much larger battle over who had the right to hold others accountable and whether justice applied equally to everyone. As cameras flashed around him, Marcus straightened his shoulders. The real work was just beginning. 24 hours after the confrontation at JFK Airport, Marcus sat in his temporary office at Celestial Airways headquarters, reviewing the media firestorm that had erupted overnight. Richard Palmer, released on bail pending federal charges, had wasted no time launching a coordinated counteroffensive. Breaking, aviation expert claims racial revenge behind Celestial Airways firings, screamed one headline from National Daily News, a right-wing tabloid known for inflammatory coverage. Palmer family destroyed by tech billionaire's power play, declared another from conservative America. Zoe placed a tablet in front of Marcus, showing Richard's appearance on Morning America Today, just hours earlier. The former flight supervisor appeared subdued, articulate, and completely transformed from the raging man who had been led away in handcuffs. I've dedicated my life to passenger safety, Richard said earnestly to the sympathetic interviewer. 27 years of perfect service records thrown away because one passenger felt entitled to special treatment beyond what our policies allow. The interviewer nodded solemnly. And you believe this was about race? I believe Mr. Beaumont has weaponized legitimate social concerns to execute a personal vendetta, Richard replied smoothly. My team serves passengers of all backgrounds every day without incident. This was a deliberate setup to justify his hostile takeover. Marcus closed the video, his expression unreadable. He's been well coached. His wife's cousin is a crisis PR specialist, Zoe confirmed. They're painting you as the angry black man abusing corporate power for revenge, while presenting Richard as the dedicated professional victimized by identity politics. Marcus scrolled through his emails. The stock price for Celestial Airways had dropped 12% at opening bell. Several major advertisers had placed their contracts under review. Conservative politicians were calling for congressional hearings into reverse discrimination in corporate America. More troubling were the messages from board members. Though Marcus controlled majority voting rights, several influential minority shareholders were expressing grave concerns about the direction of the company under his leadership. Douglas Whitaker is particularly vocal, Zoe noted, referring to a banking magnate who controlled 7% of the airline's shares. He's demanding an emergency board meeting to discuss hasty personnel actions taken without proper procedure. Marcus wasn't surprised. Whitaker and Richard Palmer shared membership in the same exclusive country club, one that had systematically denied application to every non-white executive who had applied for decades. His phone chimed with a security alert. The address of his New York apartment had been posted on a right-wing message board, along with calls for peaceful protests against corporate tyranny. Similar threats had been made against Horizon Technologies' headquarters in San Francisco. "Sir," his head of security reported via video call, "we've increased protection at all locations, but the online threats are escalating." Someone claiming to be Richard's son is encouraging followers to boycott not just Celestial, but all companies associated with Horizon. The extent of the backlash was calculated and coordinated. Palmer's connections ran deeper than even Marcus had anticipated. Karen Whitfield had joined the offensive as well, giving a tearful interview to sympathetic media outlets. "I dedicated my life to making passengers feel special," she sobbed. "Now I'm being portrayed as some kind of monster because of a misunderstanding." Mr. Beaumont never once identified himself as the company's new owner. The deliberate missing of the point was breathtaking. The fact that she would have treated him differently had she known his position only confirmed the discriminatory nature of her actions. More concerning was the notification from Celestial's chief financial officer. A key supplier, Palmer Aeronautic Services, was threatening to cancel their maintenance contract, citing breach of trust with management. The company, Marcus discovered, was owned by Richard's cousin. "They provide specialized parts for our Boeing fleet," the CFO explained nervously. "Replacing them on short notice would be challenging, to say the least." It was a strategic strike at the airline's operational capacity. If planes couldn't be properly maintained, they couldn't fly. If they couldn't fly, revenue would plummet further, strengthening the board's position against Marcus's leadership. Even as these corporate maneuvers unfolded, personal attacks intensified. Conservative media began digging into Marcus's past, questioning whether his success was due to preferential treatment and diversity quotas rather than merit. His previous business decisions were suddenly being scrutinized for evidence of reverse racism against white employees. "They're trying to make this about you rather than Palmer's actions," Zoe observed, watching the coverage spread across multiple platforms. Classic deflection strategy. Marcus nodded, unsurprised but disappointed. The playbook was familiar. When powerful people faced consequences for discriminatory behavior, they mobilized resources to reframe themselves as the real victims. A text message notification appeared on his phone. It was from Emily Chen. "They're coming after me too. Someone leaked my personal information online, calling me a race traitor for supporting you." The escalation was both predictable and disturbing. Richard Palmer wasn't just fighting for his reputation. He was sending a message to anyone who might stand against discrimination in the future. "Speak up, and we'll destroy you too." As Marcus contemplated his next move, James Whitehall requested an urgent meeting. The former CEO entered Marcus's office looking haggard and nervous. "The board is fracturing," Whitehall reported without preamble. "Half want to support your actions, half are calling for your removal despite your controlling interest. Palmer's allies are powerful, with connections across the industry." "And where do you stand, James?" Marcus asked quietly. Whitehall hesitated. I want to do the right thing, but my family is receiving threats. My wife's gallery has been vandalized. My daughter's college application was mysteriously lost at a university where Palmer's fraternity brother sits on the admissions committee." The message was clear. Oppose Palmer's network and suffer consequences that extended far beyond one's professional life. Marcus turned to the window, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline as he contemplated the forces aligned against him. This wasn't just about 3 discriminatory employees anymore. It had escalated into a battle over who had the right to hold others accountable and whether consequences applied equally to everyone. Palmer and his allies had transformed a clear case of racial discrimination into a cultural battlefield, mobilizing powerful resources to protect their privilege. They weren't just fighting Marcus. They were sending a message to every marginalized person who might one day find themselves in a position to demand justice. This was exactly why discrimination persisted despite decades of supposed progress. The backlash against accountability was swift, coordinated, and ruthless. Marcus turned back to face his team, decision made. He hadn't built Horizon Technologies by backing down from difficult fights, and he certainly wasn't going to start now. "Call an emergency board meeting," he instructed Zoe. It's time to show them exactly who they're dealing with. The Celestial Airways boardroom fell silent as Marcus Beaumont concluded his presentation. For the past hour, he had methodically dismantled the narrative Richard Palmer and his allies had constructed, presenting evidence so overwhelming that even the most skeptical board members appeared shaken. "This isn't about one bad day or one misunderstanding," Marcus stated, gesturing to the screen behind him displaying statistics compiled by his team. Over the past 5 years, Celestial Airways has received 643 discrimination complaints against flight crews. 78% were dismissed without investigation. Of those that received any attention, 94% resulted in no disciplinary action. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. More tellingly, Marcus continued, 62% of these dismissed complaints involved Richard Palmer's crew specifically. When sorted by passenger demographics, the pattern becomes undeniable. The next slide displayed a heat map of complaints, clearly showing disproportionate incidents involving passengers of color, particularly in premium cabins. "This isn't about me," Marcus emphasized. "I was simply the passenger who happened to have the resources and position to demand accountability." Douglas Whitaker, Palmer's most vocal supporter on the board, attempted to regain control of the narrative. "These statistics can be interpreted in many ways," he objected. "Perhaps certain passengers are more likely to file complaints over minor service issues." "I anticipated that response," Marcus replied calmly. He nodded to Zoe, who distributed sealed folders to each board member. These contained transcripts of Mr. Palmer's text messages with crew members over the past year, obtained through legal discovery. I suggest you review the highlighted sections. As the board members read, faces paled. Palmer's own words demolished any pretense that the discrimination had been isolated or unintentional. His explicit instructions to crews regarding maintaining cabin standards by discouraging certain types of passengers from booking premium classes made his intentions unmistakable. "This is who you're defending," Marcus said quietly. "Not because you believe he's innocent, but because you fear being held to the same standard." The uncomfortable silence that followed confirmed his assessment. "Now," Marcus continued, "let me outline my plan for Celestial Airways moving forward." The presentation shifted to his comprehensive strategy for transforming the company's culture, beginning with the appointment of Emily Chen as the new Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. Marcus detailed plans for mandatory anti-discrimination, training, revised reporting procedures for passenger complaints, and a transparent tracking system for how such complaints were resolved. Additionally, Marcus announced, "We've discovered significant financial irregularities in Mr. Palmer's department." This captured the board's full attention. If there was one thing that concerned them more than social issues, it was money. Forensic accountants have identified approximately $8 million diverted through shell companies over the past decade, Marcus explained. Companies that trace back to Palmer Aeronautics Services and other businesses owned by Richard Palmer's family members. The revelation silenced even Whitaker. Discrimination could be debated and reframed in the media. Embezzlement was harder to spin. Mr. Palmer wasn't just discriminating against passengers, Marcus concluded. He was stealing from this company, from you, the shareholders, while using his connections to silence anyone who questioned his methods. As if on cue, Zoe's tablet chimed with breaking news. "Sir, Karen Whitfield has just agreed to cooperate, fully with federal investigators in exchange for reduced charges. She's providing access to Richard's private servers." Marcus allowed himself a small smile. It seems Ms. Whitfield keeps better records than her uncle anticipated. The boardroom dynamics had shifted dramatically. Even Palmer's strongest allies now appeared concerned primarily with distancing themselves from potential criminal exposure. "There's more," announced Zoe, reading from her screen. "James Whitehall has provided investigators with emails confirming that he was directly informed about multiple safety violations. He's agreed to testify against both Palmer and Wallace Davis in exchange for immunity." The former CEO had made his choice, apparently concluding that cooperation offered better prospects than continued loyalty to Palmer's network. Marcus used the momentum to address the board's concerns about negative publicity. "As for the media narrative, we're already shifting it. The screen displayed coverage from major news outlets now focusing on the safety violations rather than the discrimination incident. The headline, "Federal Investigation Uncovers Years of Falsified Safety Records at Celestial Airways," was far more damaging to Palmer's credibility than any accusation of racial bias. Former employees have begun coming forward as well, Marcus noted, displaying testimonials from dozens of staff members describing systematic discrimination within Palmer's department. People who were silenced or forced out are finding their voices. The final blow came from an unexpected source. Bradley Thompson, seeking the best possible plea deal, had provided investigators with recordings of Richard explicitly instructing crews to make first class uncomfortable for passengers who didn't fit the Celestial image. "In light of these developments," Marcus concluded, "I'm implementing a comprehensive overhaul of Celestial's corporate culture starting today. You can support these changes and help rebuild this airline's reputation, or you can resign. Those are your options." The implied threat was clear. Anyone opposing Marcus's reforms would be investigated for potential complicity in Palmer's misconduct. Whitaker, reading the room, made a strategic pivot. "I fully support these necessary changes," he announced with sudden conviction. "This board stands united behind Mr. Beaumont's leadership." The remaining board members quickly echoed their agreement. Principles were flexible, self-preservation was not. As the meeting concluded, Marcus received another update from his security team. The online attacks against Horizon Technologies had been traced to a botnet operated by a cybersecurity firm with connections to Palmer's brother-in-law. The amateur attempt at corporate espionage provided yet another criminal charge to add to Richard's growing list. "We've identified the source of the stock manipulation as well," Zoe reported. Several accounts linked to Palmer family members were short-selling Celestial shares while spreading misinformation online. The Securities and Exchange Commission had already been notified, adding securities fraud to the mounting legal troubles facing Richard and his allies. By the time Marcus left the boardroom, Celestial's stock had begun to recover as investors responded to news of the federal investigation and the company's proactive leadership changes. The narrative was shifting, with business publications praising Marcus's decisive action against corruption and discriminatory practices. Richard Palmer's counterattack had failed. In attempting to destroy Marcus, he had only succeeded in exposing the full extent of his own corruption. As Marcus headed to his next meeting, he received a message from Emily Chen. "Turned down 3 interview requests today. Not interested in being their model minority spokesperson. When do I start my new job?" Marcus smiled. The real work of transformation was just beginning. The Renaissance Hotel ballroom glittered with the elite of the aviation industry. Celestial Airways' annual charity gala had become the must-attend event of the season, particularly this year, as the industry's power players were eager to witness the first public appearance of Marcus Beaumont since the dramatic changes at the airline. In the 3 weeks since the confrontation at JFK, Marcus had methodically dismantled Richard Palmer's influence within the company, exposing decades of corruption, cronyism, and discriminatory practices. The federal investigation had expanded to include safety violations, financial fraud, and obstruction of justice, with Palmer at the center of an ever-widening scandal. Yet despite the mounting legal troubles, Richard remained defiant. His media allies continued portraying him as the victim of a corporate witch hunt, even as former colleagues agreed to testify against him. Tonight's gala represented both a potential reconciliation for the fractured industry and a powder keg of unresolved tensions. Marcus moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations from some executives and noting the cold shoulders from others. The industry had largely divided along predictable lines, with older establishment figures supporting Palmer, while younger, more progressive leaders embraced Marcus's reforms. "Quite the transformation you've engineered," observed Eliza Montgomery, CEO of Pacific Airlines, as she joined Marcus near the champagne fountain. "Celestial's new diversity initiatives are impressive, though I hear not everyone in the old guard is pleased. Change rarely pleases those who benefited from the status quo," Marcus replied diplomatically. "True enough," Eliza agreed. "Still, one must admire your strategic brilliance. Using Palmer's own corruption to silence his supporters was a masterstroke. The man can hardly claim racial persecution while facing federal charges for embezzlement and safety violations. Before Marcus could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. Richard Palmer, visibly intoxicated and ignoring the horrified signals from his lawyer, had arrived unexpectedly. "There he is," Richard called out, pointing dramatically at Marcus. "The man who destroyed my family's legacy." Security personnel moved to intercept him, but Marcus raised a hand to stop them. The confrontation was inevitable. Better to have it controlled than allow Richard to claim he'd been silenced. "Mr. Palmer," Marcus acknowledged calmly, "I wasn't aware you were on the guest list." "My family founded this event 30 years ago," Richard slurred, his expensive suit rumpled and his eyes bloodshot. "You think your money gives you the right to erase our contributions?" The ballroom had fallen silent, 300 industry leaders watching the drama unfold. Marcus spotted several guests discreetly recording the exchange on their phones. "No one is erasing anything, Mr. Palmer," Marcus replied evenly. "Your contributions to Celestial Airways are well documented and will be remembered for generations." The double meaning wasn't lost on Richard or the audience. His contributions now included the largest safety scandal in the airline's history. "You think you're so clever," Richard snarled, taking another step closer. "You and your diversity hires, dismantling everything we built." "Is that what you believe happened?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom. "That your downfall was about diversity rather than your own actions?" "I know exactly what happened," Richard countered, his composure slipping further. "You couldn't handle being treated like everyone else. You had to make it about race because it's the only card you know how to play." A few uncomfortable murmurs rippled through the crowd. Palmer's words echoed the private sentiments many still harbored, but knew better than to express publicly. "Is that how you remember our interaction, Mr. Palmer?" Marcus asked. "Because the recordings show you explicitly instructing your crew to deny me services offered to other first-class passengers based on how I looked. Standard procedure for passengers who don't belong," Richard retorted, too intoxicated to filter his words. "First class has standards." The collective intake of breath from the audience confirmed that Richard had just destroyed whatever sympathy remained for his position. His lawyer looked physically pained, knowing these statements would appear in court records. "And who decides who belongs, Mr. Palmer?" Marcus pressed, his voice still calm. "Based on what criteria?" "People who understand tradition, protocol, the natural order of things," Richard insisted, warming to his topic despite his lawyer's desperate attempts to silence him. "People who built this industry, not diversity hires and affirmative action cases." Every word deepened Richard's legal jeopardy, but he seemed beyond caring. Years of carefully coded language and plausible deniability were collapsing under the weight of his wounded pride. "The natural order," Marcus repeated thoughtfully. "And in this natural order, someone like me wouldn't be in first class unless, what? I was serving drinks? Cleaning the cabin?" "Don't twist my words," Richard snapped, though his expression confirmed Marcus's interpretation. "Some passengers create a better experience for others. That's just reality." "Better for whom?" Marcus challenged. "For people who appreciate quality, who recognize class and breeding when they see it." Richard's voice had risen to a near shout. "Not for people who think money alone entitles them to spaces they haven't earned." The irony of a man who had gained his position through nepotism speaking about what others hadn't earned wasn't lost on the audience. Several people were openly recording now, including journalists who had been invited to cover the charitable aspects of the event. "Mr. Palmer," Marcus said quietly, "do you realize you're confirming everything you've been denying for weeks? That your actions were explicitly discriminatory and deliberate?" Something in Marcus's tone finally penetrated Richard's anger. He glanced around, noticing the phones recording his meltdown and the horrified expression on his lawyer's face. "This conversation is over," he announced, attempting to reclaim some dignity. "My legal team will address these slanderous accusations." As he turned to leave, Marcus had one final question. "Before you go, Mr. Palmer, did you or did you not instruct your nephew at the FAA to falsify inspection reports for Celestial aircraft between 2022 and 2025. Richard froze mid-step. The specific dates and relationship weren't public knowledge yet. "That's absurd," he stammered unconvincingly. I never told him to." His involuntary confirmation hung in the air. Two FBI agents who had been discreetly monitoring the event stepped forward, presenting identification. "Richard Palmer," one began formally, "we have additional questions regarding your statements tonight. Would you be willing to clarify them voluntarily, or should we continue this conversation downtown?" As Richard was escorted from the ballroom, his final supporters in the industry witnessed the complete collapse of his carefully constructed facade. The man who had presented himself as the victim of cancel culture had just confirmed his guilt in front of hundreds of witnesses and multiple recording devices. "Well," Eliza Montgomery remarked as conversation gradually resumed around them, "I believe that concludes the Palmer era rather definitively." Marcus nodded, feeling not triumph, but a weary satisfaction. "The sad thing is, he still doesn't understand what he did wrong." "Perhaps not," Eliza agreed, "but everyone else certainly does now." As Marcus made his way back through the crowd, he noted a subtle but significant change in the atmosphere. Executives who had been hesitant to engage with him earlier now approached eagerly. The industry's power brokers, ever pragmatic, recognized which way the wind was blowing. Richard Palmer's final stand had backfired spectacularly. In attempting to reclaim his position, he had instead confirmed every accusation and alienated his remaining allies. His network of protection had finally, completely collapsed. The transformation of Celestial Airways could now proceed unimpeded. 6 months after the confrontation at the Renaissance Hotel, Marcus Beaumont stood in Celestial Airways' newly redesigned headquarters, observing the transformed company culture with quiet satisfaction. The sleek glass building, once an intimidating fortress of corporate privilege, now featured an open design that emphasized transparency and inclusion. Where portrait photographs of former executives, all white men, had once lined the executive floor, a diverse array of employee recognition displays now celebrated outstanding contributions from across the organization. The symbolic change reflected the deeper structural transformations Marcus had implemented. "Fourth consecutive month of increased passenger satisfaction scores," reported Emily Chen, now firmly established as Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. "Our new commitment to equal service quality across all passenger demographics is showing measurable results." The federal investigation into Richard Palmer's criminal activities had expanded far beyond the original discrimination incident. Prosecutors had uncovered decades of financial fraud, safety violations, and obstruction of justice. Richard now faced over 30 federal charges, with former colleagues lining up to testify against him in exchange for leniency. The sentencing recommendation came through this morning, Zoe informed Marcus, handing him the confidential document. 15 to 20 years for the financial crimes alone. The safety violations add another potential decade. The man who had once claimed untouchable status within the aviation industry would likely spend the remainder of his professional life behind bars. His network of protection had crumbled once evidence of his corruption became impossible to ignore. More surprising was the revelation that had emerged during discovery. James Whitehall, the former CEO, had been fully aware of the discrimination patterns, but protected Richard because of family connections. Whitehall's wife was Richard's second cousin, a relationship he had deliberately concealed during the initial investigation. Marcus scheduled a meeting with Whitehall, who had managed to avoid criminal charges through his cooperation agreement with federal prosecutors. The former CEO arrived looking diminished, his confident executive persona replaced by the cautious demeanor of a man who had narrowly escaped prison. "Thank you for seeing me," Whitehall began awkwardly. "I wanted to express my appreciation for your discretion regarding certain aspects of my involvement." "I didn't do it for you," Marcus replied honestly. "Celestial Airways has suffered enough public damage without adding more headlines." Whitehall nodded uncomfortably. "What happens now?" Marcus slid a document across the desk. "Two options: resignation with standard severance and a non-disclosure agreement, or public disclosure of your knowledge of discriminatory practices prior to my acquisition of the airline." It wasn't really a choice, and both men knew it. Whitehall signed the resignation papers without protest, another powerful figure who had enabled discrimination now facing consequences for his actions. With Richard imprisoned and his primary enablers removed from positions of authority, Celestial Airways had undergone a remarkable transformation. The airline's new hiring practices had produced the most diverse leadership team in the industry. Customer complaints of discriminatory treatment had dropped by 87%. More telling was the change in corporate culture. Employees, who had previously remained silent about witnessed discrimination, now felt empowered to speak up. The anonymous reporting system Marcus had implemented had already identified and addressed dozens of potential issues before they escalated. Karen Whitfield had completed the court-mandated diversity training program and, surprisingly, had written a public apology acknowledging her role in the discriminatory practices. She now worked with a community service organization providing job training for underprivileged youth. Bradley Thompson had provided key testimony against Richard, receiving reduced consequences in exchange for his cooperation. His detailed accounts of Richard's systematic discrimination had proven invaluable to prosecutors building their case. "One more item you should see," Zoe mentioned, presenting a file containing applications for the Marcus Beaumont Scholarship for minority students in aviation. Over 300 applicants for the first year. The selection committee is overwhelmed by the quality of candidates. The scholarship represented Marcus's vision for lasting change. Beyond addressing past discrimination, he was determined to transform the industry's future by creating opportunities for students from backgrounds traditionally underrepresented in aviation. As Marcus reviewed the applications, a notification appeared on his screen. Celestial's stock had reached an all-time high, vindicating his approach against critics who had claimed that addressing discrimination would hurt the company financially. In reality, the airline's commitment to equal treatment had enhanced its reputation and expanded its customer base. Later that afternoon, Marcus boarded a Celestial Airways flight to San Francisco, deliberately choosing to travel as a regular passenger rather than using the corporate jet. He wanted to experience the service firsthand, to observe whether the changes he had implemented were truly taking root. The first-class cabin crew, notably more diverse than 6 months earlier, welcomed him with the same professional courtesy, extended to all passengers. No special treatment, no discrimination, exactly as it should be. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude, a young black woman in executive attire was seated across the aisle. She received her requested champagne and caviar without question or hesitation. The simple professional interaction, unremarkable in what it should be, represented everything Marcus had fought to achieve. When small actions of dignity and respect became unremarkable, when equal treatment became the expectation rather than the exception, that was the true measure of progress. As Marcus gazed out the window at the clouds below, his phone chimed with a message from Zoe. Transcontinental Airlines Board inquiring about potential acquisition. CEO has history of discrimination complaints similar to Richard's. Interested? Marcus smiled slightly. The work was far from finished. One airline transformed was a victory, but the industry itself remained in need of systemic change. Palmer and his allies had been just the most visible symptoms of a deeper problem. He texted back a single word. Absolutely. The battle against discrimination wouldn't be won through a single confrontation or legal victory. It required consistent, persistent effort to change systems and cultures from within. Marcus had the resources, the position, and now the experience to continue that fight on a larger scale. As the flight attendant offered him a menu with no hesitation or prejudice, Marcus reflected on how a moment of discrimination had catalyzed systemic change. His response to being denied equal service had cascaded into industry-wide transformation. Sometimes justice required being in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, with both the power and the will to demand accountability. For all the passengers who had faced similar discrimination without the resources to fight back, Marcus would continue leveraging his position to create a world where such fights became unnecessary. The plane banked gently westward, carrying him toward new challenges and opportunities for change. The story of Celestial Airways was just the beginning. In this powerful story of justice, we witnessed how systemic discrimination persists, not through isolated incidents, but through networks of protection that shield perpetrators from consequences. Marcus Beaumont's experience teaches us that accountability often requires both power and courage, the power to create change and the courage to demand it. True justice isn't merely punishing individuals, but transforming the systems that enable discriminatory behavior in the first place. The narrative demonstrates how racism operates on multiple levels, from overt acts like denying service to subtle institutional barriers like buried complaints and cronyism that keeps discriminatory leaders in power. Importantly, we saw that meaningful change requires more than policies. It demands consistent action, vigilance, and the willingness to make powerful people uncomfortable. Marcus's strategic approach shows that dismantling discrimination isn't just morally right, it's also good business. By creating environments where everyone receives equal treatment, companies can enhance their reputation, expand their customer base, and tap into previously marginalized talent. The ultimate lesson is that fighting discrimination isn't a single battle, but a continuous commitment to creating spaces where dignity and respect become the unremarkable expectation rather than the exception. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you had the power to do something about it? Comment below with your experience or thoughts on how you would have handled Marcus's situation. Would you have revealed your identity immediately or waited for the perfect moment like he did? And if you believe in standing up against injustice, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that expose discrimination and celebrate triumph over adversity. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most important changes begin with a single person refusing to accept the unacceptable.